Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. It's really fun to be here, and it's great to be a native English speaker. I appreciate everyone who speaks another language because non parlo l'italiano molto bene. So I'm trying. Okay, I'm going to tell you a couple stories, a little more personal, to try and put this universal design business into some kind of perspective. So the first story is about me in 1967 when I was a 7-year-old in 2nd grade, and when my very traditional school decided to embark on a very experimental type of a learning education experience. And it was called it was called the Open Classroom System. And it originated in Great Britain. Everything okay? And the concept was to take students of all different ages and all different learning degrees and put them all together in one class. So no more grades, just everyone together in one room. Students were supposed to group together and learn at their own pace. So they came into my lovely little school and took out all the walls, took out our little desks, and put in round tables, and we were all expected to sort of sit around and learn. The teachers didn't stand in front of the class anymore and deliver a lecture. They were circulated amongst the tables and helped the students according to their different skill levels. For the students, we were supposed to learn at our own pace. So on each one of these round tables, there was a reel-to-reel tape player where we were supposed to listen to the lessons and a box of exercises that we were supposed to follow. And can you guess what happens when you don't have a formalized curriculum or a textbook or even a lesson plan? It's craziness. There was no learning. There was destruction of the video and the cassette tapes. There was the materials everywhere. It was a non-learning experience, an open crazy, not open classroom. So it sounds like a good idea, right? I mean, from an educational standpoint, to let students learn at their own pace sounds great. But what happens? What happened to that experience? Why did it go so wrong? Today I want to talk about how important it is to understand for whom you are designing. Because if you don't understand the people you're designing for, things go very wrong. And it really doesn't matter if you're designing education or learning experiences, curricula, or product spaces, systems. I'm a product designer. I always think about the products. It really has to all begin and end with the user. So, as this user or consumer in the open classroom, that's me, I wonder, did anybody think about us as the students, as the consumer of this open classroom system? And even moreover, who thought about Mrs. Hilster, the teacher who had been teaching for 30 years the same way? Did anybody consider her in this user experience, in this experiment? So anytime I talk about the user or the consumer, when I'm teaching my classes, I talk about universal design. And just as Francesca said, universal design is known by many different names. And some of them are design for all, human-centered design, or inclusive design. And at least from an American-centric standpoint, all of these terms sort of come out of the fact that the person who created this term, universal design, used many of these terms when he described this school of thought, universal design. And that man was Ron Mace. And he defined universal design in this manner. Universal design is the design of products, environments, and communication to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without adaptation or specialized design. And I think this part here is where we need to do a little bit of clarification, especially I think for students, because usable by all people to the greatest extent possible could lead someone to believe that it is possible to design something for everyone. But we know that you can't. You really can't. So you have to really take that apart a little bit and think about what that means. I think it's really important when you design something to delight your user. You really have to delight the user, and to do that, you have to know those people. So designing to delight your user and meeting the criteria of that user group. Within the functional requirements for that user group, you have to make things usable to the greatest extent possible, okay? So what that means is we have a group of people, they have particular needs, they represent a group of people like yourselves, but there's a great range of functional requirements within that. Some people are more skilled, more dexterous, can see better, can walk better. So when we think of universal design, we sometimes see this image or we think of this image. And we know that doorknobs are hard for people with arthritis, hard for people with carpal tunnel, hard with any maladies of the hands, and door levers are easier, they say, for everyone to use. But who's everyone? It's everyone with some sort of a working limb that can actually access that door handle. So everyone means everyone with a working limb. Here's an example of something that you wouldn't think of really as universal design, but it has universal design features. It's not a design for everyone, right? It's a design for people who like that aesthetic and people who can drive. But within this vehicle, there are features that make it universal. There's things that are adjustable, there's touch screens, there's voice commands, there's safety systems and alerts, and there are easy access features. So I think it's really important for students in particular to think about this idea of delighting your user group, and then within that group, thinking about that range of functional requirements and abilities. So no matter what you call it, inclusive design, human-centered design, design for all, if it works well for people across the spectrum of functional ability, it works better for everybody. So I just want to circle back a little bit to Ron Mace, who is the creator of this term, the American term, because he contracted polio at age 9 and spent the rest of his life in a wheelchair. So he was a young kid running around, develops polio in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. But in spite of that, he got a degree in architecture. He went out to build buildings that really broke down barriers and made things accessible to more people. And his philosophy was to design all products and buildings to be visually pleasing and usable to the greatest extent possible by everyone, regardless of age or situation. And I include this slide because I think it's really important to try and imagine what it would have been like to have had to have been carried. A 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old kid having to be carried up a flight of stairs. And so I can imagine someone like Ron Mace, as an architect or a designer, being really determined to create a solution to that problem. So these are the 7 original principles as we know them from Ron Mace. And the words are simple enough. Equitable use, flexibility in use, simple and intuitive. The words are very easy. It's the problem of putting them into some kind of a context. In this way, they're very abstract. So without a context, we tend to not really understand how to apply these situations. So context, or sometimes I call it a reality-based situation. So how do we do it? So we do it by learning, understanding, and modeling human intelligence, and to the best of our ability, trying to simulate the conditions that we're trying to understand. So for instance, number 6, low physical effort. Low physical effort means one thing to someone who's 20. It means something completely different to someone who's 70. So that's the context. So in my classes at RISD, we focus on designing things for the aging population. And we utilize all of these principles of Ron Mace and universal design pretty much every day. The students go through what we call a contextual simulation because they're trying to become old. They're trying to simulate these conditions. They're trying to become the user. So they impair their senses, they reduce their dexterity and their vision and their mobility, and go about their daily life to see what this is really like. And these experiments can go on for days. These simulations then inform the projects that they do later on in the semester. So, by learning, understanding, and modeling human intelligence, and to the best of our ability, because we're just trying to imagine, we're trying to feel these feelings that someone feels when they have some sort of a different ability. So to the best of our ability, simulating the things we're trying to understand, we in turn then create better products, systems, and places. So it's really about common sense and empathy. We have to do the very best we can as designers to be our users, and I think this is fundamental to design and really applies the best of what Ron Mace and universal design were trying to accomplish. So again, being a product of that confusing open classroom system, I really think without design thinking, and universal design, I wouldn't be able to do what I've done for the last 25 years, which is teach. So to wrap up, to make good design, to make better user experiences, to engage learners, or make technology usable, you have to begin with the user. Because if we don't, you end up with things like that. Thank you.